The courthouse lobby was buzzing with its usual morning energy. Lawyers hurried past with briefcases, clerks balanced stacks of files, and visitors shuffled nervously through the security line. At the far end of the room, the main entrance swung open, and a tall, dignified black man walked in. He was dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his presence demanding attention without him uttering a word. As he moved with calm confidence toward the metal detector, eyes began to follow him, sensing something important was about to happen. The security guard at the checkpoint, however, seemed unimpressed. He barely gave the man a second glance before blocking his path with a sharp gesture. "Identification," the guard snapped, his voice cold and dismissive. There was no polite greeting, no acknowledgement of the man's stature, just that single cutting word. It hung in the air like a sudden drop in temperature, causing heads to turn toward the brewing situation. The man paused for a moment, his expression composed but stern. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his ID, handing it over with a steady hand. The guard grabbed it without looking up, his eyes narrowing as he inspected it. The room grew quiet, onlookers sensing the shift in energy. They could see that this wasn't just a routine security check. It was something more, something uncomfortable. The guard's attitude was dismissive, laced with unspoken prejudice. His brow furrowed as he scrutinized the ID, as if searching for a reason to challenge the man before him. The silence in the room became tense, almost suffocating, as everyone waited for the next move. The man, who was actually a judge, stood perfectly still. His face remained calm, but if you looked closely, you could see a flash of something powerful in his eyes. Frustration, maybe, or a determination to stand his ground. Several seconds passed, each one feeling longer than the last. The guard finally looked up, meeting the man's gaze with a look of barely concealed contempt. "Step aside for a moment," he demanded, waving the ID dismissively. "We need to run an extra check on you." His words dripped with disdain, his tone making it clear that he believed this man didn't belong here. A ripple of unease spread through the lobby. People glanced at each other, whispering, exchanging looks of shock or curiosity. It was as if the air had turned electric, filled with the kind of tension that made everyone hold their breath. The security guard held the judge's ID up to the light, his eyes squinting as if inspecting a counterfeit bill. "You sure you belong here?" he sneered, turning his gaze back to the judge. Before this moment, the guard had already made it a point to make other visitors wait longer than usual, eyeing them with suspicion as if each of them was a potential problem. The atmosphere at his checkpoint was often tense, especially when certain visitors walked in. Now, he stepped forward, blocking the judge's way, and gestured toward a secondary checkpoint, usually reserved for heightened security. "Step over there for an extra check," he ordered, loud enough for everyone to hear, as if making a spectacle was part of the job. His smirk widened as he spoke, clearly enjoying the power he felt he had over those he deemed unworthy. The judge's jaw tightened. This wasn't the first time he had noticed the guard treating certain people differently. He had seen the guard eye other visitors with the same distrustful glare, especially those who, like him, didn't fit the guard's idea of who belonged. The onlookers glanced at each other uneasily, some remembering how the guard had treated them on previous visits. The guard puffed up his chest, fueled by the control he thought he had. "What's the matter?" he taunted. "Got something to hide?" The question was a veiled accusation, designed to provoke a reaction. The room was charged with tension, every person around feeling the unspoken battle happening between the two men. The judge held back, refusing to let his anger take over. He had dealt with situations like this before. He knew that snapping back would only give the guard the upper hand, validating his unfounded suspicions. He thought back to the lessons his mentor had taught him about patience and dignity. This was not the time to lose his composure. After a long, measured breath, he spoke. His voice was calm, yet there was a steel edge to it. "Your job is to ensure security," he began, his eyes fixed on the guard, "not to harass people based on your personal biases." His words cut through the air like a knife, silencing the guard's smug demeanor. A hush fell over the lobby as people listened, caught in the gravity of the judge's measured response. The guard's face flushed with a mix of surprise and anger. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that, especially not someone he had marked as suspect. He stumbled for a response, his authority suddenly feeling less solid. Around them, onlookers shifted, some glancing at each other with raised eyebrows, others nodding slightly in quiet agreement. The guard, not willing to back down so easily, took a step closer to the judge, his posture tense. "I'm just doing my job," he shot back, his voice now louder, more defensive. "We have to be careful. With some people—" His words landed like a slap, hanging in the air, heavy and ugly. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The judge stood there, facing the guard, his expression calm, almost stoic. Inside, though, a storm of emotions brewed. This moment wasn't new to him. He had spent his entire career walking through situations like this, facing judgment and doubt, simply because of who he was. His mind flashed back to his first day as a law student. He remembered entering the lecture hall, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him, eyes that questioned his place there. Some students whispered, while others gave him looks that said, "Are you sure you belong here?" He had pushed through those moments with quiet strength, refusing to let anyone's assumptions define him. And then there were the courtroom days. He recalled the time when a client's lawyer refused to shake his hand, or the day a clerk asked if he was lost, thinking that he was in the wrong building. Each of these memories, though painful, had shaped him into the man standing here now. They had taught him patience, resolve, and the power of dignity. Every time he faced a new barrier, he rose above it, showing that respect wasn't something you begged for, it was something you commanded. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, bringing him back to the present. She had always told him, "The world may doubt you, but never doubt yourself." It was that piece of advice that had carried him through the years. It was the reason he now stood here, strong and composed, in the face of the guard's prejudice. As he glanced around the lobby, he noticed the wary looks from some of the visitors. They, too, had seen how the guard treated certain people differently. The judge wasn't just standing for himself, he was standing for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. With every breath, he felt the power of his past struggles, fueling his determination. He met the guard's eyes, not with anger, but with a deep resolve that came from years of pushing against a world that often underestimated him. In the midst of the brewing tension, there was a man standing a few steps away. At first glance, he seemed like just another visitor at the courthouse, quiet, composed, hands clasped behind his back. But if you looked closer, you'd notice a certain air of authority about him. His eyes scanned the scene with an intensity that suggested he wasn't here by accident. The observer wore a modest but sharp suit, one that fit him perfectly, like a uniform of someone used to holding a position of influence. He reached into his jacket pocket, and for a split second, a small badge peeked out, a badge that looked suspiciously like the one judges carried in the courthouse. He quickly tucked it back in, glancing around to see if anyone noticed. As the tension in the room grew, the observer adjusted his glasses and exchanged a knowing glance with a courthouse clerk nearby. The clerk gave him a slight nod, hinting that they recognized each other. But still, the observer remained silent, his eyes never leaving the guard and the judge. It was as if he was gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to step in. The security guard squared his shoulders, looking at the judge with a smirk that bordered on arrogance. This wasn't the first time he had pulled something like this. Weeks ago, he had questioned a young woman's credentials just because she didn't look like the typical lawyer. Another time, he had insisted on searching an elderly man's briefcase twice, simply because the man spoke with an accent. Now, he turned all his attention to the judge, feeding off the power he thought he had. "I told you, step aside," he repeated, his voice louder, making sure everyone around could hear. "We need to be extra sure you're not carrying anything questionable." His words, veiled in authority, were laced with the same prejudice that had fueled his actions for weeks, if not longer. The judge stood there, recalling how he had witnessed this guard's actions before. The guard had built a reputation for using his badge as a tool to intimidate and control those who didn't fit his idea of who belonged in the courthouse. Today, however, was going to be different. "You think you can just walk in here like you own the place?" The guard spat, his anger now boiling over. The judge's eyes stayed locked on his, unwavering. "Your job," the judge began, his voice calm yet firm, "is to ensure safety, not to harass people because of your assumptions." The guard's face flushed with fury. He opened his mouth to retort but hesitated, realizing he was losing his grip on the situation. The tension in the room grew even thicker as onlookers exchanged worried glances. Some nodded in silent agreement with the judge, while others looked away, afraid to involve themselves in this power struggle. The guard wasn't ready to back down. "I'm just doing my job." His words landed like a slap, stark and unapologetic. For a moment, silence fell over the room, each word echoing in the minds of everyone present. The judge took a slow, steady breath. This wasn't just about him. It was about all the others who had faced similar prejudice. "No," he replied, his voice quiet but powerful. "You're using your position to intimidate and belittle, and that's not security. That's discrimination." The guard, caught off guard by the directness of the judge's response, faltered. He stumbled over his words, his previous confidence slipping away. Around them, people watched with bated breath, feeling the shift in power. The observer, standing a few feet away, exchanged a glance with a courthouse staff member who gave him a slight nod. The guard noticed this, his eyes narrowing in suspicion, but said nothing. The silent observer, who had been standing at a distance, finally moved. He stepped forward, his eyes steady and calm, as he walked toward the guard and the judge. For a moment, it felt as if the entire lobby held its breath, waiting to see who this man was and what he would do. The guard glanced at him, annoyance flashing across his face. "Who are you?" he barked, his voice filled with irritation. "This is none of your business." The observer didn't react to the guard's tone. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an ID badge. He held it up for everyone to see. The room seemed to freeze as people leaned in, eyes widening when they saw what was on the badge. It read, "Chief Judge." The guard's face went pale. He blinked, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words, but nothing came out. His bravado disappeared in an instant, replaced by shock and fear. This wasn't just another courthouse visitor. This was the highest authority in the building, and he had witnessed everything. The chief judge turned his gaze toward the guard, his expression stern but calm. "I've been standing here for a while now," he began, his voice even. "I watched how you treated this man. I saw how you used your position to insult and intimidate him, and I saw how he responded with dignity and strength." The guard stammered, I was just... "You were abusing your authority," the chief judge cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This courthouse is a place of justice, not a place for your personal biases. The way you treated him is not just wrong. It goes against everything we stand for here." The room was dead silent, every eye fixed on the scene unfolding before them. The guard looked like he wanted to shrink into the ground, his confidence shattered. He had gone from a figure of authority to a man exposed in his own prejudice, and there was no escaping it now. The chief judge turned to the crowd, his eyes sweeping over them. "We all need to remember," he said, "that respect and fairness are not optional. They are essential." He paused, then added, "This guard will face consequences for his actions today." The lobby was still, the weight of the chief judge's words settling over everyone like a thick blanket. The security guard stood frozen, his face flushed with a mix of shame and fear. The judge, who had remained silent during the chief judge's reprimand, now glanced at the guard, his expression a mix of sadness and strength. It wasn't a look of triumph or victory. It was the look of someone who had seen this kind of prejudice too many times before. The chief judge turned his gaze back to the guard, his voice calm but firm. "Your actions today showed a clear lack of respect and fairness. This is not just about you. It's about the example we set in this place of justice. When we let bias guide our actions, we undermine the very foundation of what we stand for." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The guard lowered his eyes, his shoulders slumping. The arrogance and power he once displayed were now gone, replaced with a stark realization of the consequences of his actions. The chief judge continued, "There will be consequences for your behavior. You will face disciplinary action, and you will be required to undergo training on respect and equality." He turned to the judge, nodding slightly. "I apologize on behalf of this courthouse," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "No one should have to endure such treatment here or anywhere. This will not be overlooked." The judge gave a small nod in return. It wasn't victory that he felt. It was relief, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change if people were held accountable. He looked around at the onlookers, their faces reflecting a range of emotions. Some nodded in agreement, others seemed deep in thought. The chief judge faced the crowd. "This moment is a reminder for all of us," he said. "Respect and fairness are not optional. They are values we must live by, every day, with every person we meet." His words rang through the room, a clear call for change. Everyone could feel it, a shift in the air, a shared understanding of the importance of treating each other with dignity. The scene at the courthouse served as a stark reminder of the biases that still exist in our world. It wasn't just about one guard's actions, it was about the silent, everyday battles people face because of how they're perceived. This story isn't just for the people who were in that lobby, it's for everyone listening. Ask yourself, how often do we judge others based on their appearance, their background, or things we don't understand? How many times have we let our own biases color the way we treat others? It's easy to point fingers at the security guard in this story, but real change starts when we look inward, examining our own actions and attitudes. Next time you find yourself in a situation where prejudice creeps in, remember this story. Remember the judge who stood tall, the silent observer who spoke out, and the lesson that was learned. Standing up for fairness and respect isn't always easy, but it's necessary. Change begins with us, every single one of us. Let's take this moment as a call to challenge our own perceptions, to step up when we see others being treated unfairly, and to create a world where dignity and justice are not just words, but everyday actions. The lobby slowly came back to life, the tension easing but leaving behind an unmistakable mark. The security guard stood there, his head bowed, his arrogance now replaced by a mix of regret and confusion. For the first time, he truly grasped the gravity of his actions. He had misused his authority, and in doing so, had shown the prejudice that still lingered in places meant to uphold justice. The judge, maintaining his composure, turned to leave. He walked through the metal detector with his head held high. His stride was steady, not hurried or hesitant. He wasn't just walking away from this incident. He was walking forward, as he always had. The other staff and visitors watched him, some nodding in quiet respect. They had witnessed more than a confrontation. They had seen dignity and truth win over bias. The chief judge approached the guard one last time. "Learn from this," he said softly, but firmly. "We are all capable of change, but it starts with acknowledging our mistakes." The guard nodded, swallowing hard. It was clear that this moment would not be easily forgotten. It was not just a reprimand. It was a turning point, a chance for him to reflect on who he had been and who he could become. As the judge left the building, the lobby buzzed with a new energy. Conversations sprang up, not just about the confrontation, but about the larger issue it represented. People exchanged looks and words, pondering how they too could make changes in their own lives. The scene had left an imprint, a reminder that respect and fairness are battles worth fighting every single day.